And one last look at Yesler Way before we move on from this era. Looking eastward up Yesler, the day before the Great Fire in 1889, June 6th. Okay. And this is a story I hear again and again with these great fires. June had begun like August in 1889. There was no rain. High pressure area held over the Northwest. A sunny day followed sunny day. 2 in the afternoon. What do you think happened at 2 in the afternoon? Cow kicked a bucket over, kicked a candle over, kicked over a lantern. No, that was Chicago. Arson? No, that was Ellensburg. A ball of yarn caught fire and was thrown out of a window by a boy and lit the brush on fire in an abandoned lot. No, that was New York. What do we have here? In Seattle, a pot of glue on the stove spilled over, and some knucklehead threw shavings onto the fire, and that caught fire. And then everything caught fire. Okay? It was a pot of glue. Now, we're going to move on from the fire before we really get into it. We're just going to kind of put, again, another bookmark there, and we're going to return to the fire. I might even have to do a second episode, because the fire itself, if I insert that here, we'll never see the rest of Seattle development, because it's just such a rabbit hole in and of itself. So we're going to kind of move on. We're going to remember that 1889 was the Great Fire. And then at the same time, there's still a lot of other stuff happening. Things, buildings that didn't get burned down, and this is one of them. This is the Hotel Denny on Denny Hill. And if you remember, Denny Hill is one of the hills that get leveled, regraded. So poor Hotel Denny, another marvelous bit of architecture. And this one has a backstory that's very much like Stadium High School in Tacoma. They started to build it, then it got abandoned, then it got bought out, it sat there for a decade. Somebody else took over the project, finally finished it, turned it into the hotel that is known and loved as, and then boom, regrade project, and it's gone. And it's gone. And a few short years. After all the effort of building something like this, it sticks around for a few short years. It's extraordinary. And if we could build like that then, what happened? And we'll get into that. What happened to us? And I ask that sincerely. As a designer, as a builder, as a human being living in this world, what happened? Here we are, 1889 again, the Haller Building. Just on and on and on with exquisite, ornate, brick and stone, and steel, by the way, buildings, and not just wood shacks that didn't meet fire code that were consumed by the Great Fire. The Burke Building. Now, this one is said to have been built after the fire. And when I look at this building, the textbook the history book that I took this image from, it talked about the simplicity of the design. And I beg to differ. What's simple about this? It's elegant, it's organized, it's sensible, it draws the eye upwards and brings it back again gently over and over again. It has a sort of tripartite, if that's the right word, system of threes. It has the ground level, which is our human level, right? This is where our activities happen. And then it has the primary function of the building for housing or hotel. And then it has the cap. And curiously enough, that was what I learned that Louis Sullivan in Chicago came up with, but I see it all over the place out here. It's stunning. And not to be outdone, apologies for the text, but I thought this was extremely important to point out that in 1894, Burke, who ostensibly built the building, installed a steam-driven electricity plant in the basement of the building. In addition to powering businesses and elevators in the Burke Building itself, electrical lines fanned out to do the same for surrounding buildings. It also provided power to the streetcars of the West Street Railroad to Ballard. So you're telling me that there was a steam-powered electrical dynamo that was shoehorned into the basement of this building in 1894 that not only powered up the building itself, but gave electricity to surrounding buildings and the streetcar system. The streetcar system, the one that's horse-drawn? Oh, no, the one that is electrical. I mean, talk about sustainability. What are we on about these days? Sustainability. Looks like we had a fairly sustainable grid, urban civilization in the late 1800s. You had steam-powered dynamos in the basements of buildings that were powering the city. And, oh, do you remember the Merchant Building? Now, curiously enough, this photo is said to have been from 1890, and as we'll see in future photos, this building burned down in 1889 in the Great Fire, and then got rebuilt. Did this one burn down and get rebuilt? What about this one? Did this get burned down and rebuilt in a year? But here it is in 1890, not burned down, but there it is. That's a lot. I mean, and this is why I love doing this, because I can go back and I can compare, what's going on up here to what I saw before, but it looks pretty similar. They must have rebuilt the same darn thing. I remember seeing this ornamentation, and I remember seeing this relief work, and certainly remember seeing these columns and this almost megalithic stone arch. And here's our cable car system, our electric cable cars in 1890 in Seattle, population 40,000. Now, when we talk about a cable car system, this is the infrastructure. It's being pulled by underground cables running around the city. Here's a cutaway of we see tracks up above, but it's not just that. There's cables running along the tracks. There's wheels being turned, pulling these cables, pulling cable cars loaded with passengers, going around curves with wheels at the corners that would have had to have been minimally under the sidewalk, if not under the building themselves. Giant wheels called a let-go curve. Here's an image of one of them, right? It's a lot of infrastructure. It's an incredible amount of infrastructure. And it would have had to have a powerhouse. Okay, I believe this one is in San Francisco. But as we just saw, it looked like the powerhouse for the cable car system in Seattle was a dynamo, steam-driven, in the basement of the Burke Building. So now we're back to our precious King County Courthouse, 1890. Really? That's all I can come up with. That's all I can come up with. Built in a year, giant columns carved out of stone. At least they didn't take the tower off of this one. They just disappeared the whole building. Now this building was the seat of the county. Oh, and by the way, Yesler was, I think he was appointed to be the head of the county when it was first established back in late 1850s, early 1860s. Yesler seemed to have his hand in everything. Here's another view. King County Courthouse, built in a year, made it to 1931, but it fell out of use. And like so many other buildings, they built another courthouse and abandoned this one because they needed a bigger courthouse. This one wasn't good enough, wasn't big enough. Maybe they didn't want to maintain it anymore. Oh, it got regraded. But it has a dark history because I did read that up in this tower, there were some hangings. And this is where justice was meted out. So I don't know. Maybe the souls of the disturbed got under their skin too, and they didn't want to hang out in this building anymore. So they knocked down the first Providence Hospital and they built themselves a bigger, better courthouse. This Hotel Seattle is 1890. And we're going to get back to it, but that Occidental Hotel across from the Yesler Leary building stood in this spot. Now there's a parking garage here. An awful looking mess. But this Hotel Seattle was said to have replaced that Occidental building. One thing I want to point out, other than the fact that it exists, and there's no reason for me to question that, there it is. As I said, we could build, and we did, a lot, but not nearly as ornamental, not nearly as sophisticated, not nearly as marvelous as what was here before. This is a plain looking building. It's nice. It's a nice building, but it's not what was here before. And you don't have tall ceilings. Isn't that interesting? Maybe they had to build everything the most ornate, the most magnificent, marvelous, only to kind of wear themselves out. And the next generation came around and said, it's just too much to heat. We don't need to have 14-foot ceilings. Let's just do 9. I want to make it really nice. Let's do 10. But why is it that iteration after iteration after iteration of our built environment just seems to decline and be less than what was before? Why is it that the further back you go, the more marvelous it appears to be, which is quite distinct from the way we seem to perceive ourselves, that we came from deprivation and we've become more better as time went on. 1890, Central High School, there she blows, built in 1889. Okay, this is Denny Hill, 1890. So we have Central High, and we have Providence Hospital, where the courthouse currently stands, the new courthouse, not the one I just showed you. An armory, I hadn't seen this before. All of this disappeared. All of it gone. Okay, old Seattle, old world buildings, all over the place, built in impossible timelines with relatively few people, materials that were not easy to come by. Here we are, 1891, 2 years after all of this burned to the ground. More boosterism. Pioneer Square building. Okay, keep this one in mind. Pioneer building, we're going to look at that again. I present this architecture sketch of a detail of some metalwork on the Pioneer building because this is all I could find, and I've looked and I'll keep looking as far as construction drawings. But as the good professor wrote in Distant Corner, all the architects skedaddled and they took their work with them because there was a depression in 1892 or 1893. So we don't have records. We have a lot of photos of finished buildings, and we have a lot of photos of shoot activity, but doggone it, we just don't have photos of the drawings, and we don't have photos of the construction. Pioneer Building, nice tower, don't blink. This is said to have been built after the fire, immediately after the fire. The story is the foundation was put in, but the building, to its saving grace, wasn't built until after the fire, but the foundation was ready to go. Whose building was this? Henry Esler. This was like the crescendo of his long and colorful career, and it still stands today. But they can't seem to help themselves. Somebody doesn't like towers. Somebody does not like what is going on up here with these antennas. They don't want it. Take it off. Build it, but then take it off. So there it is. You can go visit it. I have many times. There's our underground tour. Bill Spidell. Okay, this is where it all starts. Doc Maynard's underground tour. So come to Seattle. Go visit the underground. Go to Pike Place Market. One of the coolest places you'll ever visit. Here we are. Ornate, beautiful, old world looking craftsmanship. Pink granite columns. When one won't do, try a grid of 16. There's a few more photos of a few more buildings. I've got all day. I'm snowed in a hotel in Colorado. Building project I came to do was shut down for the day. You can check that out at Yurt Designs on Instagram. Cool structures, wooden yurt houses. This, when Seattle finally got its act together after the Great Fire in 1900, built themselves a brand new fire station, brand new fire headquarters. These two photos kind of raise my eyebrow because it's hard to see that date right there. But this photo was earlier, okay? This photo, I believe, was 1900, and I believe this one was 1910. So I just ask myself, why is the building in this photo look so old if this was earlier? Why does this look so worn if this was built in 1900 and this photo is soon after that? Were these some kind of placards, sconces that were removed? What are these? Oh, shut my mouth. 1890. So this was 1890 and this was 1900. Gosh, they were busy in 1890. And I'll get to that. It said that 3,465 new buildings, 3,465 new buildings were permitted in the weeks following the Great Fire. Got something in my eye. And in the fire zone alone, there was 250 buildings built in 1 year. And I've shown them to you. They're exquisite. They're exquisite brick and stone buildings because new fire codes were implemented, don't you know? In 1 year, I built a house in Seattle, more than one. But as a designer, as an architectural designer, I got one permitted for a client. It took me a few months to execute the design and even more months to get it permitted because everything happens at a snail's pace. I guess back then when they just had a few people in the building department, they just let you go. Just let you build. Go ahead. We trust you. You're professional architects and engineers and old world craftsmen. We don't want to hold you up. We want to rebuild the city. In 1 year, they built all of this, apparently. Nice building. The top doesn't go with it, in my opinion. Looks like this was an add-on. If you ask me, this would. I mean, when I see brickwork like this below, and then this kind of just, it's all right. Doesn't look like it matches the architecture though, made out of wood. And then this is from 1900, and those sconces, gas lamps, placards, whatever they were, ornaments, they're gone. And it looks like it's been pressure washed and tuck pointed, cleaned up. So it went from brand new to old and worn out real fast and then spruced up again, I guess. This is the Gottstein block, 1900. Now we're moving on. Exquisite, right? I wonder why it is that same builders that can build buildings like this just can't figure out the electrical system. All these stupid wires mucking up the view. It's almost like it's an afterthought, right? It's almost like these buildings aren't from the same people, the same civilization, the same thinking process, the same consciousness. It's almost like these wires aren't in position, an afterthought. They came later. But this is curious. Must be some kind of streetlight. Or maybe in 1900, Big Brother was already watching you. But I'm going to go ahead and hazard a guess that this is a streetlight for the intersection. And this is what we have today. Same corner, gone. Can't have that. Can't have a beautiful city like this with order and a logos that's apparent in how they build, how they design, how they execute, how they live, how they dress. Can't have the marvelous old world. Gotta have this. At least they cleaned up the wires. Now, speaking of the railroads, this is King Street Station. They said to have built this one in 1906. Okay, fair play. But this photo was taken in 1913, and this is Union Station. So the railroad outgrew this, and we had larger rail system at that time. I believe that's when we were linking up to the Transcontinental Railroad. So they built the Union Station, and a Union Station is where different rail lines, different railroad companies, all merge, keep it together. And I know that this is from this time because here we have this elevated roadway, and we got into this in Seattle Underground episode where they built up the street level. Okay. Now, speaking of street levels, here's the public library in Seattle. This is from 1906 as well. Purportedly, beautiful building, Seattle Public Library. Draw their S's backwards. It's kind of fun. Maybe that's a signature of the photographer. But this is 1914, just a few short years after And the whole street grade is changed, right? They built the building. Here's the stair. Here's the grade. I guess it kind of goes down over there. And then just a few years later, there's the same building. There's the stair from the different vantage point. Man, when Seattleites decide that they're going to change grades, boy, they change grades. All terraced, nice, down to the street with a brand new cable car track running through. Busy, busy, busy. There's something being built in the background there. Almost like another terraced building. Curious. Fun. Yeah. Yeah, so, we know how to build. It looks old, though, doesn't it? Doesn't this look like it's from another time that's worn, aged, moss-covered stonework, almost from another realm? And I hesitate to say it. This is interesting. I'm just noticing the triple door, very Egyptian, and I've seen sacred temples with this arrangement in many places. You can look this up. You'll find this motif in old sacred buildings all over the world. Curious. I'd like to know what's going on up in this roof. It looks like an old world building, but who knows? Now, speaking of Regrade, this photo on the left, there is Denny Hotel. It's got to go. Can't have it. 1907, 1909 on the right, if you can believe it. They move fast when they want to. 2 years, maybe 3, maybe almost 3, to get all this soil out of here and to level it and to build foundations. Well, wait a minute. To design and to engineer, marshal the resources, the planning, the infrastructure. Okay, you got street lamps in here. You got plumbing, drain, water, gas, sewer, all that happening under here. Cable cars, pulley systems, and then the buildings themselves. But don't worry, because your credit is good. All right, and yeah, here's this building right here. So we're looking the same place, but very short amount of time to get there. One more view of it. Let's see if we can see this building. I don't know. I guess not. Here's our elevated roadway. Okay. You see some scaffolding underneath here. This is a raised road. Horse and buggy. Denny Hotel. Gotta go. Unbelievable. Another view of the Regrade. I'm not going to hang out here too long because I covered this on the last episode, but again, for context, this is 1907. Denny Hill, gotta go. Gotta flatten the city. Gotta level it, right? Now here's a map of the Regrade, the cuts and landfills in Seattle. I'll give you some sense. I don't think I presented this in the last Seattle Underground episode. What you see here is this sort of polka dot. This was the high ground that got leveled, right? High ground, that's these areas. And all of that, along with the sawdust from Yesler's Mills, got pushed into tidal flats and got pushed into Elliott Bay to extend the downtown towards the waterfront. And the Duwamish River, which I'll show you shortly here, got straightened out and turned into a shipping canal. Goodbye to 10 or 20 or 50,000 years of culture and history. Here's Lake Union. And that's black is the cut a channel there into Lake Washington. Lake Washington will go all the way down to Tacoma. And the cut portions were in 1916. Okay. Now, right now there's a system of the locks. It's called the Chittendale locks. We call it Ballard Lock because this is Ballard over here. And Magnolia Discovery Park is over here. It's a beautiful park. If you're ever in Seattle, it's absolutely enormous. So there's a lock system that'll let you get from Lake Union to, we'll see in a second, it escapes me. This is Green Lake. And so you can see how extensive, how absolutely massively extensive all of this regrading and cutting and filling and leveling was. Now this map is from 1908, and I just absolutely adore this map because that was Salmon Bay up here, because what it shows is the Duwamish River still is here, still exists. It's not just a shipping canal. I'd never seen this before I saw this map. Tidal flats, obviously all of this is built out, right? Railroad snaking around. It was 1908, but the tidal flats are still here. They hadn't filled them in yet. And you can imagine when this floods, it would just bring all the nutrients and so forth and so on to the soil around it, as rivers do. And since I've been in Seattle, all I hear about is the destructive flooding that happens with the shipping canal near the Duwamish River as it is now, as a canal designed around base mercantile interests. And that's part of our problem, right? A huge part of our problem. I remember in 2005 when Hurricane Katrina hit New Orleans, it was a hurricane force of 1 when it hit the MRGO Canal. The wall of water went up that canal that connected Mississippi River to Lake Pontchartrain and destroyed the levees. They collapsed, folded and crumbled, and a lot of people had to suffer for that. And that's all Army Corps of Engineer. So I wonder if this is Army Corps of Engineer as well. I think they've mucked up a lot of things like Mississippi River. But this was the Duwamish River a little over 100 years ago. No more. These tidal flats were filled in, right? When you go to a Mariners game or Seattle Seahawks, this is where the stadiums will be. This is industrial. The Port of Seattle is here. Okay, gotta have level ground for that. Makes you wonder. Moving on from the Regrade, 1909. In 1909, Seattle had its own World Fair, and I'm going to do a future episode on this. This is the Alaska Yukon Pacific Exposition. Now, if you're not familiar with World Fairs, I would recommend you start with the Chicago World's Fair. From there, you could look at the Buffalo World's Fair. Nashville had a World's Fair. San Francisco, Omaha, St. Louis. St. Louis was one of the most magnificent. Buffalo, but really Chicago is the one that most people have heard of. I was an architecture student for 6 years and had only heard like superficially of the Chicago World's Fair, but I was very curious about it and picked up a few books along the way. Now it's kind of this whole World Fair thing has sort of exploded, at least in terms of people being brought back into the collective consciousness, I would say. And these fairs were all said to have been temporary affairs, who built in a very short amount of time, used for 6 months, knocked down or burned up in a fire. And they're their own rabbit hole. Really interesting to me to know that Seattle had its, and I will return to this topic in another episode. I'm presenting this for now because this is the authorized bird's eye view of the AYP exposition. I wouldn't want to show you anything yet that's not authorized. So, moving right along. Oops, we snuck in another Regrade photo. I'm just going to keep going here. It's, you get the picture, but this is what they do. This is instant. I will stop here because this kind of tells the story. They had these giant hoses and they were siphoning salt water from Puget Sound and just blasting the snot out of the hillside. And then they were carting, soil from other areas, and they were filling in, cutting here and filling in there, and just a dirty mess. And Seattle was just a muddy mess for decades. And the power of this water coming from Puget Sound just, oh God. But one thing, and I would love to talk to a soils engineer about this, was how come all of this soil is just soil? Like silt. How come it's all just loose silt? There's not like rock and obstructions. It doesn't seem to be, and I'm sure they used dynamite in here too. Sure, it wasn't just water cannons blasting away at it, but from the images that I see, it sure seems like it. I don't know, just a question. I'm not a soils engineer. Now here's the photo once again to orient us to modern era. Okay, trolley lines, raised street level, and King County Courthouse, before it disappeared in 1930, 1931. So I'm bringing this picture because, you know, oftentimes we talk about who they are and the things they are doing and that they are conspiring against us. And we wonder, who is they? I don't know who they are. Actually, the truth is I don't know, but I saw this picture and it sure seemed like a clue. And where I found this, it was captioned that the Knights Templar came to town and hung their symbols through downtown Seattle. And this is the spookiest thing I've ever seen. Here you have the Freemason symbol, G, right, for God or for geometry. You have your compass representing the 3 and your square representing the 4, together which are 7, bringing us back to God, the sacred geometry. It sure is spooky. Upside down pentagram. So, yeah, who's running the show? Who's doing all this stuff, right? Who doesn't let us be? Who builds these buildings or has us build these buildings and then knock them down? I mean, these plans, these schemes, these resets are being concocted somewhere, aren't they? They're being thought up by somebody and then they're being executed. This isn't just random. You look at city after city after city across this country, you're going to find the same story. And you should look where you are. Look at the old buildings. Look at your census reports from the times when those buildings were supposed to have been built. Look at the state of the infrastructure of the time. You know, look into the architects that are said to have been built, that are attributed with having designed those old buildings. See if it adds up. Now I'm going to continue doing more of these, focusing on other cities. This one I really wanted to get into Seattle. So I guess we have. I don't know how long I've been going on for. Hope this is even recording. And I hope you're still sticking with me. I know it's a lot. It's a ton. It's an enormous topic. But I took, you know, last month or so, and I just took this deep dive down into it. And there's been times where it's disturbed me. There's been nights where I actually, honestly, had a hard time sleeping, or I dreamt about these buildings burning down. We haven't even gotten to the fire. And I might move through that quickly because honestly, I think you get the picture. You know, these buildings are gone. They built there was an old city. Here it is. I don't know who built it. I don't know the answer. But look at them. There weren't enough people. I'm just going to say it. There weren't enough people when Seattle was being settled. So from where I'm sitting, these buildings were here. And then Yesler and Maynard and all these other characters came to town, and maybe this is why they decided to make Seattle their city. It's because there's already stuff going on here that they discovered, they found, they founded, they found abandoned, perhaps. I don't know. I don't know the truth of it. I just know that the story that we're given doesn't make any sense at all. So we had a city, and then they built another city on top of the city as they disappeared the old one. Here it is, 1930, right? Again, 1928, 1928, 1930. They move fast when they want to. No memory of it, gone. Some old photos, some stories about architects skipping town because it was another, you know, recession, taking all their drawings with them so we don't have records. What a load of hooey. You know, I'd like to talk to the architects who wrote this book, Distant Corner, and ask them, how come they didn't ask these questions? And, you know, to be fair, I haven't read the whole book yet, and I'll keep going through it, but I'm not getting the sense that they've asked these questions. So we'll ask them. Now, here's one of the last buildings I want to share with you. It's Coliseum Theater, said to have been built in 1915. I love this picture. This is from 1929. The reason I love it, first of all, it's just a beautiful building, but it mentions Hearst, and I told you Hearst was going to come up again. The newspaper baron, I believe from the San Francisco area, California coast. At least that's where his mansion is. Maybe he's from New York. I've been to his mansion half a lifetime ago. Tide of Empire. The Hearst Zeppelin round the world flight. So this caught my eye. So interesting. And keep in mind, Zeppelin, there's airships. I think about the destruction of cities across our country and how could it have been. And now here is the Coliseum Theater in 1917 when it was first built. It's very strange, but it's very appealing in some regards. It's an open dome, or it's a dome with a cupola lit up. So this would be glass built into this kind of nave here. It's not a nave, but it's a, cut in. And God, I mean, it's really quite beautiful, very inviting. And this was the interior, 1915, pipe organs in the Coliseum Theater. Can you imagine? Here's a postcard of it. It's extraordinary. And then this is what it is today, a banana republic. Okay, there's no magic in this building. I mean, just compare it. This is magical. There's something about it. It feels alive. It's glowing. Yeah, it's at night, it's lit up, but it feels alive. And incidentally, see that glass cupola? It ain't here. This is 1929. So it's like they take it, and you can't see the open dome, right? They've taken that away with Hearst's story, the Zeppelin trip around the world, and they've stuck these tacky theater glowy neon signs here because the circus has come to town. They can't just let the building be, but this is what it was. Why wouldn't you just let this be? It speaks for itself. It's called architecture. There's no magic here. It's dead. It's Banana Republic. Not dead. It's still beautiful, but it's not alive. And here, this is said to be a construction photo, and I love a good construction photo. And when I find them, I'm going to bring them to the forefront because they seem to be so precious and rare. But when I look at this, I'm not seeing construction of, at least in this photograph, I'm not seeing construction of a building. I'm seeing construction of an open dome, right? And a cupola. So again, bookmark, if not an asterisk. So old Seattle meets new. And this is what we have. This is Seattle today. Back in 1889, June 6th, a pot of glue in a cabinet shop. No, wait, a paint shop. No, it was a cabinet shop. What is a paint shop? It was knocked over by accident. And a 64-year-old man, no, wait a minute, it was a 24-year-old kid, threw shavings onto it to smother the fire. And the rest is his story. And his story is not even straight to begin with, because all the stammering and stuttering is kind of what the Seattle PI did, where it printed one story about a paint shop or paint factory, and 2 weeks later said it was a cabinet shop. And in one iteration of the story was a 24-year-old, when the other iteration was an old man that did the dirty deed. And in one story, whoever did it skipped town 2 weeks later, so his identity couldn't be, positively verified. So we really don't know. But all of downtown burned down. Sorry about that. And just the downtown, by the way. Just the downtown. You remember that the Seattle PI is owned by Henry Esler? Okay? Always the downtown. Look up urban fires across America. Chicago, right? It's always the downtown. Ellensburg, Spokane. They go on and on. I'm going to do a whole episode, a whole deep dive into urban fires if I can honestly stomach it, because it bothers me. This is the photo that is most often presented having to do with the Seattle fire. Bunch of wood buildings. Remember, that's the story. Wood buildings burned down. Okay. What did we see for the last, I don't know how long, hour and a half? A lot of old stone and brick buildings, but this is what we're most often shown is the poor, hapless public being beset by fire. Here it is again. Fire department said to have been overwhelmed, stood down, and then this is the aftermath. Ruins of stone and brick and buildings that are just blown to smithereens. Now, how does fire do this to a building? How does a fire just pulverize and turn to not even just rubble, but pulverize brick and stone like this? I'm asking. If you have a good idea, leave a comment, please. I'd like to get to the bottom of this. Remember our Occidental Hotel? Where did it go? Where did it go? Gone. Just like vaporized. And I love this collage, and I wish I could credit whoever made it, because it really brings out the sense of memory, right? Always the creepy dudes in their top hats posing in these fire aftermath photos. You see this again and again. But this is the corner of that Occidental Hotel, that glorious old world building with all of its exquisite, marvelous detail, craftsmanship, stonework, which is now parking garage. That is just the mockery of downtown Seattle and the mockery of all that is true and just and beautiful. Occidental Hotel, again. Now, this I find interesting, and I said we were going to go at this with a bit of a forensic lens. Here it is after the fire, right? Strange dudes posing, always posing like they've just like shot a rhinoceros or something. But you got the spire. Kind of reminds me of spire from after 9/11 that just vanished into the ether. But here we have a brick and stone spire, right? I'm just showing this again to evidence, to really emphasize. When I say gone and pulverized and vaporized, I mean it. Where is the building? Because here, spires are gone. Look at how much brick. Look at how thick these walls are. This is not brick clad. These are feet thick of brick upon brick upon brick, building up this base. You have to blow this up. So in the earlier photo, this dude's posing like these weirdos back here. The spires are there, and now they're not. Okay, so now we have a pile of rubble. Okay, they got to clear the fire debris. I get it. So they blew it up. They set some dynamite, and they got the spire down. They probably set more dynamite. They didn't have backhoes, not like, they might have had steam shovels. They probably did have steam shovels. I don't know, 1889, maybe not. Maybe those came a couple of decades later, and we're using regrade projects, but, there's a lot of dynamite, a lot of force it takes. And look, this got sheared off. That telephone pole was still there in the earlier photo, and here it's sheared off. It's gone. So whatever they used to blow up this portion must have taken that off with it. So I have to ask the question. When we hear about these urban fires, and I've looked into them, oftentimes what you hear is the fires raging out of control, and in order to save one part of the city, they'll go in and blow up certain buildings to make a fire break. And you hear this in, when it comes to forest fires as well. They'll make a fire break, fight fire with fire. And then you read that, well, they tried it, they had the best of intentions, but maybe they made things a little worse. Maybe they spread the fire, but they were trying. Is there a point at which we have to just hit the pause on all that and ask the hard question? Were they actually blowing up the city on purpose? Now, if those buildings that we saw, or this building here, the Occidental Hotel, if that was already here and they didn't build it, these settlers, they might not have had the same level of pride of ownership in it, right? They might have seen it as an obstruction to a grander plan, a modern iteration of civilization that they intended to roll out with the old. It's called progress, hard to put in infrastructure when you got old buildings in the way. But also think about the fact that, or the apparent fact that it's so often the downtown, the business district that burns up in these urban fires. And why the business? Well, that's where they keep the records, right? Who owns what? You didn't have digital files that existed in the cloud. You had file cabinets. You had court documents. You had permits. You had plat maps, right? If a bigger fish comes to town and wants to own all that, or change it, or rearrange it in their image, or somebody has, a bigger fish has a bigger plan than your hat shop on the corner or your hotel, well, it's got to go. So are we looking at the biggest crime scene in American history, the memory of which has been wiped from our consciousness? Is this part of why most people can't remember who their great grandparents were, or at most, can follow their family tree back 3-4 generations? Just asking. I don't see wood buildings. Frankly, I'm starting to get a little offended at the idea of that. Some people consider themselves empaths, right? They pick up on the energy of other people really easily, and they have to be careful going to parties and who they interact with, because they can take on their mood. Well, I'm kind of like a building empath. I've been working all my life, ever since I was a kid, on remodeling old spaces, remodeling old houses, renovating, refurbishing, renewing. You put a lot of yourself into a remodel project. And sometimes you can pick up on the energy that was there before as you're breathing new life into space. And I used to really pride myself on that, being able to breathe life into a new space, but it took a lot out of me. And, maybe some of it's like epigenetic as well, where my ancestors were builders. I don't know. But I do know that when I look at these photos, I find it disturbing. I think about all the work that went into this, regardless of the timeline, all of the labor power, the human ingenuity, the energy, the time away from family, the effort, the creativity, just the whole process of building is awesome. The pride of craftsmanship, there's nothing like it. When you sculpt something in 3D reality that is not just beautiful, but inhabitable and functional and safe and warm and protective and uplifting, and then just to have it obliterated for base interests, because highway plan, because newer, better ways of doing things. Maybe newer isn't better. Maybe this grid system that they laid out in the wake of the fire was not better. Maybe it's just a trap. Maybe it's always been a trap. This photo I find curious for a couple of reasons. On one hand, here's our stone, large stone, really large stone. A lot of work to carry this around, to bring this to site. And remember, the time periods were so short when all of this was supposed to have been built. All of this was pre-1889. Another thing is steel beams. I didn't know they had steel beams at that time. There it is. I thought that came after the fires. Steel and glass, that's what we were told in Chicago by the Chicago school architects, came after the Great Fire. I'm not saying they didn't have steel. Yeah, sure, but they didn't have a railroad to get it there. And I didn't know that buildings were built with that. And again, who, how, and really when was all this built? Now we'll close out that section on Seattle fire with this lovely, lovely bird's eye view map. Seattle in 1889. Now I had 1890 population of 40,000. This is shown 1889 population of 33,000. 33,000 people. And I love this map because this purportedly was drawn up, sponsored by a mining and real estate company. Okay, prepared especially by Llewellyn Dodge and Co., mining and real estate brokers. This is Seattle before the Great Fire, immediately before, because this is in 1889. Okay, all of this. This is all of this. This is it. Just the downtown and this part of the wharf. Okay, there's another map that will show a line here, but that's what was lost. And I said in my last video that it was 26 acres, and I was way off by a factor of 5. I misremembered. It was more like 125 acres. 125 acres of buildings just pulverized. There looks like that's our Occidental building. That looks like this is our Yesler and Leary building. Okay. And what I love is that they took the time, in a sense, almost to memorialize these buildings. Okay. Look at all these lovely brick and stone buildings. Here is Hotel Denny. This one didn't die to the fire, but it died to the regrade. Here's Pioneer Square. The Pioneer Building that Yesler built, supposedly before he died, with its tower still intact. Now, wait a minute, though, because the narrative I read, the Yesler Building was built after the fire. And I've read that in several places. The Yesler Building foundation was started, so it is said, before the fire, but to its saving grace, wasn't built until after the fire and the rubble was cleared. But there it is. I'm not making it up. It's on this map, sponsored by the real estate brokers, pre-fire, 1889. I guess boosterism only goes so far in determining truth in history. All of these beautiful, ornate brick buildings in old world Seattle. The Fry Opera House. Oh, this is interesting. It's got a kind of a medium tower on it. We'll split the difference on that one. Incredible. It's just incredible. And this building I haven't even seen before. This is the Llewellyn Dodge building. Well, no wonder they drew themselves a nice map. That's lovely. That's a nice building. Hope they left the tower alone. Guarantee loan and trust. I mean, spare no detail. So just real quick here, Ellensburg. I happen to be going through Ellensburg. I happen to just absolutely, literally, coincidentally happen to find their town museum. I walked in and the first thing I see is a display about their fire, July 10th. This is a month and a few days after Seattle's. Okay. And again, the same story, except this one was suspected arson, but they really don't know. And it's a mystery. They're still trying to solve the mystery. But tell wooden buildings, no fire codes, but the pictures tell quite a different story altogether, right? Who done it? Who done it? They don't know. They still don't know. They suspect an act of arson. This is not brick and stone, is it? And who built this in Ellensburg so early in its development? Much fewer people than would be in Seattle. I would have loved to have seen this. I'm going to do another video. I'll talk about Ellensburg and I'll talk about Spokane, which had its own fire. And here, just for giggles, I looked up Vancouver because it's right next to Seattle and wondered if this whole story extended up into Canada. And sure enough, Vancouver Great Fire. This was 1886, a few years before, right? Destroyed the city, but was eventually considered to be beneficial as the city was rebuilt with modern water, electricity, and streetcar systems. And this was 2 months after Vancouver was incorporated. So there's something about, be careful, Washington becomes a state in 1889, and its cities all just start spontaneously combusting. Vancouver becomes an official city, incorporated. Maybe that's a clue. Became incorporated. 2 months later, just the downtown burned down. So beneficial. Few more here, kind of put the bow on all of this. Seattle Central High, Providence Hospital, the eternal glory of Sister Mother Joseph and her architectural prowess, replaced by the U.S. Federal Building. As an architect and as a human being, whatever this is about, I don't want anything to do with it. And this is Seattle. Regrade finished. I would place this photo, 1940. This is what they did. These are the tide flats. This is where the Duwamish River started. This is Elliott Bay. Here's Lake Union. All of this was regraded. All of this was regraded. These were high, hilly, cliffs going down to the bay for ages and ages and ages. A whole city built upon it. Cut down, disappeared, regraded, filled in for base mercantile interests and sport. Gotta have your circuses. I'm not against sports. I consider myself an athlete still. I don't play sports, but I'm athletic. My boys are athletic, football, soccer, but professional sports is something entirely else. But that's another episode. This one's closing. Thank you for sticking with me. Those who have made it this far, I hope that you've gotten something out of this. I hope that I can keep it. I hope that I can put it to rest a little bit. This took a lot out of me to look this deeply into this history. And I feel like in some respects, it's just scratching the surface, because I feel like this is a story that repeats over and over and over again in cities across the country. So it really raises questions in my mind about who we are, where we come from, what our real history is, what our real legacy is, what our story is, what was taken from us. I appreciate Bill Spidell digging into this to the degree to which he did, but I believe that he was still, while he questioned the characters and the character of the characters that are referred to as the founding fathers of this city, I don't think he questioned the truth of the narrative itself. So I'm raising those questions. Who built old Seattle? How did they build it? When did they build it? It's worth looking into, because if we don't, we will keep being reset upon. And if there's anything that I've learned in these last 3 years, it's that resets happen, whether we like it or not. We're constantly being conditioned to expect the worst. We're constantly being demoralized. We're constantly being kept in a state of fear. And I resent that the children, and I'm thinking about my children, have to be confronted with this over and over and over again. So by looking into this past, I think that we can reclaim something that we had, something that we knew, something that was perhaps a little more intuitive and a lot more aligned with divinity. I'll leave it there. Hope that you join me again. Got more irons in the fire. And for now, I just want to say that I'm not going to get to do this full time as much as I would like to put these episodes out on a regular basis. Run a design business. Again, dreamdesignbuild.org. You can find my work there. Find my yurt house projects at Yurt Designs on Instagram. I'm a family man. I have 3 boys that I like to spend time with. And then at the end of the day, doing double shift, my wife just wants to go for a walk in the park with the dog. So, I'm a regular guy, and I do this because I care and because I think I have something to offer this conversation. So long may it continue.
They used to tell me I was building a dream,